Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. So I'm going to be doing this every Monday. We for a long time we did the webinars for business, but we sort of ran out of topics. And after reading Mr. Steele's book, there are quite a few things in it that the documents I have just don't add up. So I'm going to read something that he wrote in his book, and then I'm going to show you documents and then you guys can decide for yourselves whether or not you think that what's the most accurate representation of history, whether it's memory or the documents, and it's your decision. I think that's important to do that, especially since Mr. Steele I don't really know. I never really knew him. But after reading his book and the way he disparages Romana as well as myself and makes a lot of comments that are just not true about me as far as a number of things and things like that, I figured it was time to set the record straight, as they say. So he says, early one brisk fall morning in 1963, I left my apartment on the upper Fifth Avenue, New York City, and took a bus downtown to 57th Street and walked west across town until I reached the shabby, old-style New York tenement, fronting an entire block. So I'm going to focus on that because, not just that. There's a number of videos out there where Mr. Steele is interviewed and talks about things. And, the first one of the things he says that he never signed a book and there was never any book. And nothing like that. So I'm going to find. Let me see. Here we go. I hope you can see it, but you may. It's going to be small. But there's a picture, right? And that's Joe and Ted and Bart and Moomaw working out. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's a telephone. And right next to the telephone, there's a pile of books. And that's where you enter the studio. So when you enter the studio, as soon as you would enter, there's the telephone where you would make phone calls and call people back. And then there was the sign-in books. And, Joe had two ways of keeping track of people. There was the one where you worked in your sign-in book, right? For guests, and everybody signed in, and that is where you would put your pertinent information, your name, your phone number, and your address. And if that changed, you would re-enter your name with the new address. And that happened with multiple people. Romana's in there multiple times. Some of the elders are in there multiple times, and it's all dated, right? So we know the date. And so, when you look at the dates, so that was the one way, right? And that was so that if you needed to be called or anything like that, they had your information. They wanted to send out a invitation to the holiday party or things like that. They had your address and they could send it to you, and it was up to date. Okay. Now they also had cards that you would do to work out in, and I'll take care of that at a later date. I can say that when I bought the business, I had multiple boxes of those cards for 40 years worth of those cards. And at the time, I didn't really understand, the historical value. And to me, it was just a bunch of boxes I was probably never going to use because there was people that have been long gone. So I got rid of them. And when I got rid of them, I also thought I'd gotten rid of these books. But a few years after the lawsuit, I was going through a box of photographs, and in the bottom, there was the books. So I thought I had thrown them out, but I had not. Okay, so that's sort of where that comes from. And so I'm going to show you a couple things. He says, what year was that again, did he say? I forgot. Let me see here. I want to make sure I'm clear about that. Okay, where did I put his book? Well, I think we said 63. Or was it 64? Where is my... Oh, there it is. So just to clarify it one more time. Yeah, 1963. And I'm pretty sure he got confused with his mother and his father. Because when he first, in in November of 1996, in his deposition, it says, the question, how often did you work out? I mean, he's being asked about Joe Pilates. And this is from, this is a copy of the deposition that they took. Whoops. Sorry about that. You popped out of my ear. So, there is the deposition. Has the date. It was November 14th. And he's being asked about Joe. So let me see here. He says this. And would you say, how did you meet them? They're talking about Pilates. Actually, my parents had heard of them through one of their longtime pupils named Ruth Bacour. And I went up to the studio, which was then on 8th Avenue, and started working out with Joe and Clara. How often did you work out? 3 or 4 times a week. It's funny, in his book, he says it's only 2 or 3 times a week. So his memory, and I'm going to show you through this, that 25 years ago was pretty bad. So I'm not so sure his memory is as good as he claims it in this book, because it's very detailed, and he was very undetailed in his deposition and his testimony in court as well. How often do you work out? 3 times per week. For how long? From whenever that was, 1967 through, I guess, 1985, somewhere in that period, when they finally closed the New York 56th Street studio, whenever that date was. And then the next question is, when did Joseph Pilates die? He died, I was going to ask you that, was his answer. And then I chimed in, 1967. And then he says, well, if he died in 1967, I have been going there since 64 because I knew him for about 3 years before he died. That could be correct. Okay? So, when you go to the guest book and the entry, what we see is that in 1963, in September 18th, 1963, we can see who was there. And this is, I don't know if you can see it here. Let's see, can you see it? The third one down where the sticky is. Mrs. Arthur J. Steele. I think it's J, right? I think it's J. Mrs. Arthur J. Steele. And right next to in the parentheses, it says Bacour. So they reference who, sent him there. Okay? Then, the next entrance for a Steele in the book is November 9th, 1964. And you can see that is the top one, John Steele. Right? Same address as his wife. But then we don't have any entrances of a Steele until it is, let me see the date here, September 23rd, 1966. And here we see John Steele, right? And his address. And you can see it's, 66 rather. Okay? So 1966. So that's when, he was in the book. Now, this is the book he said there was never any books. I have a pile of them. I'll show you here for a second. I think you can see them right there, right? That pile of old books right here. So and that's not all of them. There's still a few more. So and that looks about the size of that pile that was in that picture, maybe a little bit bigger, but it's a number of years later, so that's it. I mean, it grew over the years, okay? And what's interesting is, so let me see, 23rd, so about 6 weeks later, somebody else shows up. His brother Lewis, right? So Lewis Steele, different address, different phone number. So what appears is that it seems to me, Mr. Steele's a little confused because, the documents, he says he never signed it, but he did, right? And there's documents there that basically show that his mother was there and his father was there later, and she got his, her sons to go around the same time. For some reason he thinks that, he makes it sound like, Joe latched onto him for whatever reason, not his brother or anybody else, and did all these things. And we're going to go through the book and go through all the documents to do that. But just to do so a couple other things that's in the deposition that's kind of relative to this is relative to documents and or memory. So this one says, do you have any files or any documents relating to Joseph Pilates or the studio? No, I have moved too many times since then. They have either been lost or discarded. All right. So again, I'm not the only one who, old files, got rid of old files. Then there was a question, did you ever tell Mr. Greenspan not to send any cease and desist letters? I'm going to deal with this later. It's about the trademark. But what he says, if you hadn't put those letters in front of me, I wouldn't have ever remembered Mr. Greenspan. I have no memories of him. I have no memory of speaking to him. I had only shown me my answer. I would not have even remembered his name. I have no memory whatsoever of Mr. Greenspan. So we'll talk about that when we get to the trademark, and that's going to be another week. But, okay, and then it says, okay, so it says, and they're talking about something else. He says, so I assume that's the correct of the best of your recollection. Yes, it is. I either recalled it at that point or I don't recall it now, and I put it in quotes for some reason. So he's talking about another quote. And some of these we'll get to. But I just, it's relevant in relationship to, when, it's one thing to have a memoir and, you want to fluff it up, you want to tell your story, you want to do everything. That's fine. But when you say it's history, and 25 years ago you had a bad memory, and now you write a book 20-some years later, and we all know, the science shows it, and we know it, that when we get older into our 70s or 80s and 90s, your memory is not as clean, crisp, and clear as it used to be. And so you need to trust the things that are closer to when it happened than that are farther away. And when you're looking at primary sources, and this may be considered a primary source because it's a deposition, well, that was a lot closer. So his original memory, before he was told at death and all that stuff, was 1967. Well, that's a lot closer to 66 than 64 or 63. And he says 63 in his book, so. And in this, it was, so it to me, I wasn't there. I can't tell you for sure, but I'm suspect. Okay. And it says, can you, he said, he's talking about when you say he says, this looks to me like the upstate crowd, upstate New York crowd, Hugh Bivell, and I remember him. And then the question is, when you say upstate New York, where do you mean? Joe had his place up in Jacob's Pillow. It may have actually been in New Hampshire or Massachusetts. So, 1 out of 3 is not bad. There's a whole crowd of people that used to go up there a lot. Okay, well, obviously he wasn't one of them. And Joe invited his best, the people that those people got to go to the Pillow were, the true friends, the people that he really cared about, and invited his friends to come and hang out with him and do stuff with him. Mr. Steele, that never happened with Mr. Steele, obviously. Okay. Then one last one. So this is my favorite in this, and he's talking about Mr. Gratz. They were talking about equipment. Well, we actually wanted to, and I'm going to get more to the equipment in another week as well, because it's very clear that he did not bring Mr. Gratz in if what his book says is true. So and we'll show you with documents and pictures as well. All right, and these are some of the documents. We actually wanted to sell more. We needed the money, and we always had a few $100 on the machine. We always made a few $100 on the machine. Not many, I tell you. And these were machines manufactured by Gratz. When he says, answer is by Gratz. I deserve a lot of credit for remembering that name. I can't even remember my child's birthday, but that name popped up. Right? So, maybe he was playing the smart lawyer, and not avoiding and all that stuff, because that, lawyers are pretty good at that. But, as we continue each week and go through the documents in the book, you can make up your own mind on that, whether or not that's the case, okay? So that's it for today. Just something short and sweet. I'm going to try to put that out there. If you are interested, every Monday at 6, I will be going through his book and going through the documents and seeing exactly what he said. And it's interesting because even in the depositions, compared to what he said in the book and other people's depositions, there's quite a bit of inconsistency and factual. It's just not fact. As far as the documents show. If all of you who came yesterday or Saturday rather, for the fundraising webinar looking at the history of the business, I appreciate you all coming and helping. And in that, I went over and discussed a little bit about Joe's will and the fact that and showed you, and I will do that here as well. Again, we'll go a little bit more in depth. I just wanted, that wasn't it was more about the history, but that was part of it, and I'll go into that deeper here. But the will was found by Kathy Strack afterwards, and it was after the court case, but in his depositions and to the judge, and the judge asked twice, and it's interesting because in the book he talks about how meticulous and thorough she was. Well, she asked him twice to make sure that there was no will, because if he was the executor of and helped Clara out, then the only way she probably would have been able to sell that property was to have some sort of will or something like that. And guess what? There was a will, and his name, his signature is all over it with notary public and things like that. And they needed that to be able to sell the property. Okay, and this is also going to go into. The whole thing of, he talks about, Joe didn't leave Clara anything and she was destitute and all that stuff. Well, between the property and the business, I think Clara made $60,000, approximately, maybe 65, which is probably around $400,000 in today's money at that time. So, make a statement that Joe didn't leave Clara anything is just ridiculous. I mean, because they had that property together, and she got it, and she sold it, and $460,000 when her rent was probably $300 or $400 a month, would have lasted 20 years or 30 years. So she was taken care of. I mean, he wasn't a millionaire, but it wasn't like he left her destitute the way Mr. Steele makes it sound, and he had to give her everything and do everything for her, take care of her. Well, Joe did a really good job of taking care of her, as far as I'm concerned, considering the situation and where things were, and if the studio never made any money, how did he have the money to buy 56 acres in the Berkshires? All right, because that's still a lot, and then he built his own little studio and property. So that's it. Okay, thanks everybody for joining, and I will see you on Tuesday. We have our reading. Elaine and I have a reading for our the Renaissance of the Greek Ideal, History of Exercise. We have our Return to Life reading on Saturday. If you're interested in watching the video from Saturday, you can still register. It'll be available until this Saturday coming up. It's $25. All the money goes towards rebuilding Joe and Clara's bungalow in the Berkshires. That's what it'll go for. So if you register, you'll be able to get the recording, and you'll be able to watch up until Saturday. After that, it's gone. And then I started my anatomy yesterday, Basic Anatomy 1. If you're interested in that, it's a 10-week series, and you can still sign up, get the recording, and get all the work and do all the things that way. Okay? So that's sort of all that we got going. And I know Elaine has a bunch of stuff, but she's not joining me here. She's just watching. So, or maybe she is. So I see her. She said Friday. I'm not sure what that was. So thank you all for joining me. And every week, let's get to the root of the history and debunk all the things that are based on memory that is obviously not as clear as it could be, and you'll know the real deal. Okay? All right. Thanks a lot for joining me. I'll see you all later.